human trafficking to become a dedicated force in the anti-traffic movement since 2008. As a seasoned fundraiser, grant specialist, speaker, and writer, Kristin tirelessly amplifies survivors' voice, which is such an important project and mission, aiming to boost their economic stability and ensure safety post-trafficking, as well as work with various teams to get women out of ongoing trafficking situations. Hi, Kristin. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. How are you?
I am good. Thank you so much for being here, for
Thank you.
sharing your story with us. I just want to jump straight in because we've got so much to cover. Just want to tell us a little bit of your background, and also we can get straight into like demystifying, like the where does a survivor come from? Like how did you get to a place where you became, in the human traffic as a victim?
Right. Thank you so much for having me. This is exciting. So I'm Kristin. I'm from Southwest Virginia in America for all of you people watching around the world. I know I have some friends in Africa watching, so this is really exciting that we're able to do this live. I came from a really good home. Had mom, dad, little brother, dogs. Lived on a beautiful lake. Grew up in church. Grew up, and sorry, my phone is now buzzing. Let me turn that off. Grew up in church. Did fairly well in school. Had a lot of friends. No major. I mean, your typical rebellion stuff, dabbling here and there in some substance abuse stuff in high school. But it really, things went downhill. I went to college and I was sexually assaulted, and things just went downhill.
Yeah.
So I came back from college. I did not finish. I came back from college and moved to a new city and was like, oh, fresh new start. I'm gonna, work this job. I'm gonna train to be a chef. Worked at this really, really nice, really well known restaurant and motel or hotel, and was doing good. I had a house, and I had dogs too then, and you can see my dog is
Yeah.
here with me today. Everybody knows me, knows Bonnie. I see she's my manager. And things were going good. And I met these girls and I slowly started getting back into some substance abuse. And there were some very much what I call love bombing, kind of similar what cults use, sort of like all of a sudden becoming, and you remember I'm coming off of, a sexual assault. I'm in depression. I've got unmedicated ADHD, unmedicated bipolar disorder, new city, don't know anybody, new job. And I think as we spoke a few minutes ago, like I was ripe for the pickings.
Yeah.
I was in a very vulnerable space, especially when more drugs showed up. And these girls were, what I came to find out later is these girls were very much paid to groom me. To we would and I just met them kind of walking to and from the bus stops to go to work or to and from work, and I would go to pay for something at a store and they would pay for it. We would go to the mall and get clothes and they would pay for it. And then they started like helping me pay bills, and the
Yeah.
money just kept showing up. Then the drugs kept showing up. And then by the time that I realized what was going on, I'd lost my house, I'd lost my job, and they're like, "Oh, you can move in with us."
Yeah.
And that was the House of Horrors. And that was when I moved in with them. And it just got. And then by the time that I did realize that I was being trafficked, which back in 2002, 2005, that wasn't a word that we used. I mean, it's very much thought that everything that I was involved in was my fault because I put myself there. And by
Yes.
the time that I realized how bad it was, I couldn't get out. And it took literally like my family coming and getting me out of that house. And I
Wow.
went and got services in Nashville. And a few years later, I started working in this sector in the anti-trafficking movement. And here we are.
I mean, it's there's so many things that you've said that it's we don't want to think about it. I think, right? First of all, you came from what the society classifies as a normal family, right?
Very normal, very, well-to-do. We weren't rich, but we had everything that we ever wanted. I mean, comparatively speaking to the rest of the world, we were very rich, and we were a very tight family. We went on vacations together all the time. My mom was a teacher, so she got to stay home with us, and during the summer, and we lived on a lake and had jet skis, and we had a very lovely upbringing.
Yeah. And I think also what you talked about the ADHD and the bipolar, like during the teens and having to go through that and perhaps not getting the right
Yeah,
medication or
they would
support.
sort of, when they first started diagnosing me, they would just like throw everything at the wall and just see what stuck,
Yeah,
would stick. So I would bounce off and off medications, and they would try certain things, and the side effects would be so terrible, or I wouldn't be consistent in taking them, or they would just make me sleep all the time. So
yeah,
I was never really consistently medicated, or I think even properly medicated or diagnosed during that time. It
yeah,
wasn't for lack of trying. I think that the
exactly.
doctors did the best that they could, but I just think
Yeah.
there was a lot of things presenting. There was addiction, there was mental health, there was a lot of stuff presenting, and they sort of didn't even know what to treat first.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then of course that led into the drug abuse, and that
Mhm.
feeling of being vulnerable, and then the sexual.
Self-medicating and all that. Yep.
Yeah, when I remember when I interviewed Heidi, and we talked about Heidi, who is also
Mhm.
working in the
Love her.
same,
I
yeah,
love
in
her.
the same industry and doing an incredible job, educating people around, how this can
Mhm.
happen to anyone. I think, it really became apparent that, because I asked her, who can get recruited, right? Like, who are the people that actually becomes the victims? Like, what do you say about that? Because of course you have also been involved in lots of different women's stories about that.
Mhm. Yeah, if you're breathing right now, you can probably be recruited, in some form or fashion. People who find themselves in a vulnerable position,
Hmm.
children, teenagers. We talked a few minutes ago about some older people, 40s, 50s, that I also
Yeah,
know that ended up in a labor trafficking situation. It's one of those things. It's one of those things that you don't even realize that it's
yeah,
happening. You may think something is off. You may think something is, why, or something's you're being exploited in some manner. But because of certain things, like because of drug addiction, because of mental health, because of the way society views it, because some people don't have family support, some people don't have, friends, because of all of those things, you 100% believe that you put yourself in that situation, almost like, well, who am I to complain now? I'm the one that put myself here. I felt that way for a long time. And then
yeah.
you got the shame and the guilt going along with what's happening. And it's literally almost impossible to get out.
So with that shame and the guilt, like how do you and Heidi talked about that as well. Like she said, people are like, why don't they just walk out? Like why don't they just,
Yeah.
like people are like, why don't they just like do this? Like we live in America, like it's everybody's free, right? Like
Yeah.
how does that how did that make you feel when you were like in it?
Well, very much. I know that we hear a lot in the domestic violence movement about coercion and control. People will say that to domestic violence victims. They're like, well, your husband left for work every day. Why didn't you just leave? The brainwashing and
Yeah.
the mental gymnastics that it takes to separate yourself from something like that. Like I literally had to be physically removed from that situation. The last several months, I wasn't really allowed to leave the house that I was at. I was in a basement, but before then, I could come and go as I please. I could, kind of. But then when I realized, like, hey, wait a minute, what are you doing with your life, Kristin? That you need to. And once they realized that I realized that I wanted to leave, that's when I wasn't able to leave. So, but before that, physically, I could come and go as I wanted to, and and I've often thought a lot about that, about why didn't I just walk away? But then you got to think about drugs. Well, if I walked away, if I went back home to my parents and called them and said, hey, I'm ready to get off the streets, I'm ready to come home. Well, I couldn't do drugs there. And I wasn't necessarily ready to stop doing drugs. I couldn't have the freedom that I had, that I thought that I had. And also to these people that are year around, there were other women that I became very close to, because we were all in almost like similar to what I would. It's like we were in a war. We were surviving together, and the thought of leaving those women and not being there with them that I was living with, it broke my heart. Like to know that, okay, well, I get to get out, and I tried for years. For years, I've tried to track down some of those women, check on how they were, how they're doing. A couple of them did get out. One girl, we just found out 3 weeks ago, they actually overdosed. And she's been trying to get out the entire time, but she ended up having children with one of the traffickers. So that, like, instantly, forever, she's connected to him. And so she kept trying to get away, and she overdosed and passed away 2 weeks ago. And she was like the one that I tried so hard to get out. So it's almost, it is, if for lack of a better word, it becomes your family. And so then you've got, sometimes when I would leave, those guys would just randomly show up at places. Like they would follow me and I wouldn't know. And so I never knew when they were going to show up, where they were going to be, if somebody, and they also at one point, and I think this is true, I'm not sure, had said they knew where my parents lived.
Yeah.
I think that they did. And so they would threaten me with that. And so there's just a lot of there's a lot of violence, a lot of threats, and you're just in survival mode. You're just trying to make it to the next day. And so the thought of leaving, that's no way.
Yeah, right.
That's not happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like you mentioned about the domestic violence survivors. I mean, they stay because of their kids, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
they're
Oh,
like,
yeah, absolutely.
I can't leave
Yeah.
because, and the more this mental cohesion is happening, the more, the less powerful you feel, right? Like I can imagine it becomes to a point that your self-worth, and you just feel like, what's going to happen if I can't even be out there because I don't know how to be out there, right?
Yeah, it's and actually when I was in it, again, this was in early 2000s for a few years, and when I was in it, I didn't ever think about leaving. The only time that I would think about leaving was when there would be a particularly a violent encounter with someone, or things had just gotten so bad, or I would just start missing my family, or there were a couple of times that I kind of just sort of like had some moments of clarity to where I was like, hey, you need to get out of this. And again, that's when I was like, and then when I did try to leave, I couldn't.
So when you go around and speaking to, to different publics and different, companies or different audiences about this, what do you see from society that you would like to change? Like what it is, the one thing that you
What kind of time do we have? I think there's a couple of points that I want to hit on that. So first of all, I would say that there are a lot of organizations that have done a lot of really good work and are doing a lot of really good work that has even brought trafficking to the forefront of mainstream view, so that everybody knows about it, and it's so appreciated. But there's a lot of organizations that have silenced the survivor's voice.
Mm-hmm.
That have decided for whatever reason that they're the experts, that they have their degrees, and their social workers or their case managers or their law enforcement or their doctors, and that they have all the answers. And while I'm not saying that they don't, I don't think anybody has all the answers. I'm not saying that they're not doing good work, but if you don't have survivors
Mm-hmm.
engaged at every level of your organization, you maybe need to reevaluate your organization. Because nobody, and that goes twofold. Not only does anybody, somebody said something to me last night on LinkedIn. They said, well, nobody can understand it unless you've been in it. And I said, well, I agree. However, there are people like you. There are people like, my friend Steve, who did his podcast, and my friend Carrie and her podcast, and, people that are willing to be like, hey, we don't know a lot about this.
Yeah.
Let's talk. Let's find out. Let's do a whole podcast series, or let's do a documentary like my friend Jeff, and let's figure these things out. Or, my friend Ben and Jess, they've got this amazing organization, and they're now, actively fighting trafficking in Memphis. And I don't think that you had to have been so let me just make sure I don't misrepresent that. I don't think you have to have been through it to understand it. But all those people that I also just mentioned to you have taken a great deal of time in talking to me and asking me questions and saying, hey, how could we do this? How could this be better? What do you think about this? And and with mine, and not that I know everything, but I also have a huge community of survivors all over the world that are dear, dear friends of mine. And we, like, every Saturday, we either have, I do a prayer group on one Saturday, and the alternate Saturday is we have a social call through an organization. And basically it's just where survivors log on to Zoom, and we just talk about, my friend Esios is with the facilitators, and I think she's watching. So hi. She's amazing. And we just get to talk, and we get to find out, what's going on, like what's going on in your country, what things are working, what things are not working, what are some challenges you have, what are some joys that you have. So we collectively can take all of that information, each of us, and can take that back to these respective organizations that are one, and we can consult with them, and we can advise them, or you can hire us, put us on your board directors, hire us as your program directors, let us write blogs, pay us to write blogs for you. And there's also a certain belief in America that some people have, that survivors shouldn't get paid necessarily as much as regular staff, or some believe some people shouldn't get paid at all for sharing our stories and doing the work. And there is a lot of stuff that I do for free, but those are things that I choose to reach out for. Like, for example, I'm a volunteer for We Fight Monsters. And I probably, we're an all volunteer team, and we all work incredibly hard every day to, and we don't accept a penny. And so, but those are things like that I reached out and was like, hey, what can I do to help? So listening to survivors, paying survivors, understanding that we are the experts on this. We need everyone else in this fight. We need law enforcement. We need medical doctors. We need corporations. We need everybody. But please just know that when you're in the room, that you might not necessarily have all the answers. And for everybody just to maybe show survivors a little more respect when it comes to that sort of thing, and just allow us to be, and don't tokenize us as survivors. Like, we're professionals. We're professional at what we do. Like everybody, I'm sure, I've had my off days where I've not been so professional, I'm sure. But I mean, in my position, in my career, I'm a professional. And so trafficking just happens to be the thing that I'm the expert on. Just like many, there's hundreds of survivor leaders, survivor experts, all over, probably thousands all over America. And we're doing really good work. And I just, for me to tell society, just engage us, talk to us, have coffee with us, shoot us an email. Like, we're very accessible, and we very much want to get involved.
And I think it comes down to judgment, right? Like you're saying, like, it's like people labeling you like you're a survivor.
Like,
that pity. And and I'm not for a second I'm comparing my situation here, but with the cancer it's the same thing. Once you have had cancer, people look at you like with pity. And when you go to see their doctors, they're like the oncologists, they've never had a dose of chemotherapy. And to be honest with you, none of them knows what's going to happen when they give it to you either, because anybody can just die just with one dose. And sometimes you want to say to them, have a shot and then let me know how you get on.
Let me call back and let me know how that works out for you. And
exactly. And I think it's now that we have children, my husband and I are being so conscious about trying to educate the children not to be judgmental and labeling people, one thing or the other, which is, I must admit, that's really challenging. And how do we stop that, right?
Yeah, I think that I know that. So in 2000, when I went through my experience, I actually received prostitution charges, and being a daughter, that's the very hardest thing in the world, is to tell your dad that you have prostitution charges. Even though it was a trafficking situation, and even though those are going to be vacated, which means they're no longer going to be on my record, still back then there wasn't really a frame of reference for anybody to even talk about trafficking. And so that was really hard, and my family has been wonderful supporters of everything that I've done. And I think it did take a while to digest, as I imagine that it does. It took a while for me to digest, that is what happened. And so, and I do believe there's been a lot of really good work around the sort of the PR image of survivors, because I think a lot of it has to do is that we are able to start being out front like this, and we are start able to be visible. And I'd say in the past 3 to 5 years, the tide is really starting to turn on that stigma. So, and one of the things, the organization that I was telling you about earlier in Nashville, called Thistle Farms, that I went to, the thing that they did that I think was transformative for me in my life is they didn't look at me and say, "What did you do?" They looked at me and they said, "What happened to you?"
Wow.
So I think that is the change that people need to do. We want to be seen as victims? No, we don't have a victim mentality. Most of us don't. But were we victimized and were we victims? Absolutely.
Yeah.
We were. And I mean, people don't look, and also, we go through a lot of sexual assault and domestic violence. But you throw the word trafficking in there, and it's almost like we have something's wrong with our moral compass or something. Like we just woke up one day and was like, you know what? I want to go sell my body. And that's just not how it happens. And I think people need to be more cognizant of that.
Yeah. Well, that's very powerful what you said. The way that we, the wording is so powerful, right? Like just a simple change.
Yeah.
And, we were talking earlier, how do you go from that situation to finding a job? It's the same thing. I mean, I used to be a recruiter in my past life.
Yeah.
And it is very hard not to be judgmental when you're looking through CVs. What did this
Mhm.
person do? Because as a recruiter, you have to present that CV to a client. And although we would like to think that we're living in a world that it's not discriminatory, the world
Mhm.
is very discriminatory. I had managers telling me I don't want to hire anybody with an accent, and I would say to them, "What do you mean, like an accent like mine?"
Oh gosh, I would never get a job.
But you know what I mean? Like that was the
Yeah.
kind of, that's the reality of it, unfortunately. So how do you go from there? Like, to, because you need to create a life again, right?
Well, I'm still figuring that part out. So fortunately for me, I did manage to make it out of that whole situation with no felonies. So that hasn't barred me from any sort of employment. But still, I've got those gap years. I know
Yeah,
recruiters are like, "Well, what were you doing
yeah,
during those 10 years?" And I'm like, "Well, I was in jail for, we're not gonna." No, I'm just like, I was taking some time. And a lot of what survivors do, we do contract work. So, for example, large anti-trafficking organizations will, hire us for a short-term contract to speak at a conference or to do training or to
mhm,
work in an advisory capacity or to do a webinar or something like that. That work is good and it pays really good when it's available, but
yeah,
it's not enough. So there's a couple of solutions that people are become very creative about. So for example, the place in Nashville, there were women there, some of them would have dozens of felonies or maybe didn't have any work history or never worked, never
yeah,
held a job, no
yeah,
education, stuff like that. So Becca, the founder, was like, well, we're housing them, we're getting them clean and they're doing great. What do we do now? So they started a business. So now the business, I think when I was there were maybe 20 of us or something. And now it's like this huge facility. They make a couple, like I think $12 million something last year. They make bath and body products and it is all ran and staffed by, there are some
that's
support
beautiful.
staff, but it's largely, I would say 90% staffed by graduates of that program that are all that, and it's a very different work environment. You go in, you have meditation in the morning.
Oh,
Um, you
wow.
if you're just having a day and need access to a therapist or something like that's happening, that is something that they've got a wellness program. And so and then we've got so those are kind of some creative solutions, like some social enterprise. And so, but other than that, the only other answer to that is getting your record clear. And
Mhm.
that's something that I work a lot on, and it's called vacatur in America, where instead of having your record expunged or dismissed, vacatur is basically an apology from the court that you never should have been convicted of that crime to begin with.
Mm,
And we're seeing it slowly happen more and more in each state,
mhm.
but it's a state specific thing. And so we just need to be sure that we're getting people in policy, in legislation, that are advocating for those types of things for criminal record relief.
Yeah, and understanding that that's possible, right? Like you're saying, like it
Yes.
is
Yeah.
possible. Yeah,
Yeah. It's 100% possible. Yeah.
yeah. The church that I go to, my pastor has a project in one of the Asian countries where girls recruited, well, are sold by their families to the sex trafficking, and they have a house there where they, pick the girls up and they kind of give them a childhood again, but they grow up there and they make little bracelets. I have one here.
Oh, cool. That's awesome.
Yes,
So yeah, there's organizations like Trades of Hope. I don't know if you know about them.
yes,
And
it's she can. That's the name of the organization, and they do
that's very
clothes. They
cool.
do, bandanas, things for the hair, and
And that's the kind of thing it's gonna take for, people to have, and one of those things is, while that might be a temp, like, some of the people, like, for example, when I was at Thistle Farms, like some of my friends and sisters that I love dearly are running the program now. They've been there 10, 15, 20 years. I chose because I moved back home. So but it was good for me to like just to even get back in the routine of
yeah,
like having a job, going to work
I
every day,
know,
getting up and getting dressed and like just being feeling normal as that feels. But just to get back into the routine of things, and they did professional development and all that kind of
yeah,
stuff. Those are the things that need to occur around programs. And there's plenty of like 18 to 24-month programs in America, but we need to start looking at aftercare for
yeah,
survivors. We need to start looking at survivors, 5, 10, 15 years down the road. Like, hey, you can't pay your electric bill. Here, let's help. Oh, you're having trouble with transportation. Let's find a way to fix
yeah.
that. So that's another, I think it's going to need to be a solution in like the ongoing, like, how do we get from that horrific place to living a life of, a life of beauty and, of light.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, when you think about 18 to 24 months, I mean, you're basically saying like,
We're barely,
getting over
yeah,
a
I told
trauma
somebody
like
the other
that
day,
in 18
yeah,
months.
yeah, I told somebody the other day, well, I'll tell you, my friend Ben, who's got this amazing, the We Fight Monsters program. And I was like, how are you guys just down here doing this stuff, 4, 5, 6 years out? I was like, it took me 2 years to even put a sentence together.
Yeah.
Like it took that long for me to even like find my way back to like breathing and like being around society. And you guys are doing this incredible program, 4, 5, 6 years out of addiction. Like, how are you even doing that?
Yeah, I've seen
But
him. He does really, he help people like homeless, drug addicts. I've seen him on LinkedIn,
oh
right?
gosh,
Like
yeah. I was with him in Memphis a couple weeks ago. I went down there and we did this huge event, and we actually got to do some outreach with him and his wife Jess, who are just amazing people. And just
yeah.
we would just just going to like the corner store, and people just flocked to them. They were like, Ben, Jess, like they just knew him, and they have such a good standing in the community. And they're probably, I don't know if there's any people like that I've seen be able to come out of that, that horror, that drug addiction, and go right. But we always say that we're broken people just trying to put each other back together again. And just like, we have this insatiable need to just like run back into the fire. Not everybody can do that. I don't recommend that to everybody,
No.
but there are those of us that God has just sort of built that armor of protection around in that manner.
Yeah.
That's the thing that we can do. We're bad at a lot of other things, but we're good at that.
Yeah.
They're actually doing an event tomorrow. They're doing another event tomorrow where they're feeding and food, clothing, and they're just in a corner of like a Walgreens parking lot, and they're just inviting everybody to come, and they'll make sure that everybody gets what they need. It's incredible.
Yeah, and I think what you said at the beginning. I mean, you can be open like myself, like to understanding a little bit more, and but really when you go through it and you have somebody that you're trying to help to get out of it or have just come out of it, I mean, that is invaluable because nobody understands. And again, I hate to compare this with my cancer journey, but like when I was going through it, the chemotherapy treatment, I was speaking to a lady who had just gone through it, and she could understand exactly what I was going through, whilst nobody around could, even my husband, who was there with me 24/7, because he wasn't receiving the chemotherapy, like he wasn't like really going through the motions of it,
Yeah.
and I think
Yeah.
like I said, if as a society we could support organizations like that.
Survivor-led, survivor-engaged organizations. Like with We Fight Monsters, like I volunteer, but they very much like like with Sparrow House, and if it had I'm written a lot of the guidelines and the SOPs and stuff for Sparrow, and they 100% have engaged me at every level on anything that's like trafficking, anything. Like they've never presumed to just like, oh, this is the best thing, we're going to do this. They've always been we're very open. We have a really good relationship, and we're able to. They know my whole story. They probably know a lot more than most. And I think that, I'd like to think that the people like that I am close with, that I'm personal friends with, that do have organizations, do take a lot of what I say and a lot of, of my opinion and my experiences. I mean, little things. For example, we were at a conference, and there were name tags, and it said, put a blue sticker on your, put a blue sticker on your name tag if you are okay to be photographed. Put a red sticker on your, and I've never seen that before. And because it's still a lot of danger for people, just because we go to conferences and just because we might be visible, that is that visibility at our consent.
Wow.
So like if you're just a random photographer taking a picture at a conference, you don't know who you may be putting in danger. So little things like that. And I've never seen it in any other trafficking conference. I've never seen that.
Wow.
So and I know that a trafficking survivor actually is the one who recommended that.
Yes,
so
exactly.
little things like that people don't think about. And so and you're right. So it is, there are a lot of things that only survivors, and I think survivors are survivors are survivors are survivors. We're all surviving from something. And so don't ever diminish, like try to, like you just keep saying, well, you don't want to compare your journey to mine. We're both survivors. Angelica, we're both survivors. We all went through trauma.
Yeah.
We went through war. And I think it's just that survivor mentality and that survivor, like that fight, that get up, that grit, that just like, I'm not going to let it get me down. I think that's what unites us.
Yeah, I think that's very beautiful that you said that. And you mentioned earlier, it's not that we have a victim mentality, because when you have a victim mentality, you wouldn't be here having this discussion.
Right.
And I think that is such an important part of the process, from going from that place to just like going back to real life.
It really is. And having people around you that refuse to, they can feel sorry for you and take pity on you. But, like when I talk to you about it, don't, that's so, how awful for you. Just be like, I'm so glad you got out of it. Now, what are we going to do? Now, what are we going to work on? What's next for you?
Exactly. Yeah. So what do you have to say to parents perhaps that are, worried about their, children? Is there anything that you can kind of say like to people?
Talk to your kids. Talk to your kids. Also, I think that and I will say this as someone who and 13-year-old me would probably disagree, and 14-year-old me would, but pay attention to what's going on online. When I was online back in the 90s, as much as I was, this wasn't an issue.
Yeah.
But we see every single day, we're seeing traffickers and these slicker, sneakier tactics, and like we're barely able to keep up with what they're doing, and we think we're 2 steps ahead of them, and then boom, they come out with something else.
And that's
If
online,
you're
right?
not
You're talking about online stuff.
online, yeah, phones, online, computers, laptops. I'm not saying to read your kids' stuff, but read your kids' stuff.
Yeah.
Pay attention to who they're talking to. Pay attention to, changes in their attitude. Pay attention to, are they, just, your kid.
Mm.
And the more time that you spend with your kid, the less time that kid has to spend
On the
with
phones.
people that just know who you invite into your home, know who your kids are spending time with. Who are they? If they don't get home, if they've got after school stuff, who are they with? Like, are there's friends' parents home? Are they, just pay attention to that kind of stuff, I think. And again, 14-year-old me would 100% disagree with what I'm saying right now, but 42-year-old me thinks that that's probably a good idea.
Yeah. And so simple yet so challenging these days, right? With both parents working, people leading busy lives. I think it's so easy to get disconnected from the simplicity of just spending time with your kids.
Everybody's just go, 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 go all the time. I mean, our stepdaughter is involved in so much stuff. I mean, she shares a home with her mother. She's here and she's there, but she's just so involved in so much stuff. By the time that she gets home in the evening, she's like, "Hey, love you guys, going to bed."
Yeah.
She's just exhausted, and I'm like, that's and then parents are doing the same thing. And I don't think that it's anybody. I don't think it's a bad thing at all. But I think we need to be more cognizant of the fact that we're losing that family time, and we're losing that bond in a lot of homes, especially in America. I'm not sure about Australia, but I know in America it's happening for sure.
Yeah, I think this is happening here as well. And we went traveling as a family for 3 months last year in a caravan, and it was amazing. And it really highlighted to us that we were doing this, go to after school, go to this activity, that activity, and all of a sudden we were in a caravan like together, and it was so beautiful that getting to know them.
Did it take you guys a few days or like a week to like adjust?
Yes,
to just all be
it did. And we had a dog on top of it, so it did.
Oh, right.
But in saying that, it was so special, like to really talk
That
to
sounds
them
very
and
cool.
just, be bored with them, and just to,
Yeah.
and you realize now when we came back, we said, we don't want to be like we were before, like going from here to there, here.
Oh, wow. So it
We
create a
really,
permanent
yes,
change.
tune
That
things
is
down
lovely.
and kind of spend more time together, because my son is 11 now, my daughter is 9, so he's time to get into kind of.
Oh, they're fun ages.
Yeah, and we kind of say, like we want to spend more time with them, because of course, the challenging years are here to come, and the more time we spend, with them at the beach and doing outside stuff, the less time that we want to spend on the, computers and things like that.
And then they have that foundation. They have that foundation. So when they are 14, 15, 16, and something crazy does come up, they have mom and dad to fall back on, as far as, like my parents, like I think their biggest lesson to me was like, just never lie to us. Like no matter what you do, just don't lie to us. Just tell us the truth and we'll help you figure it out. And I always knew that. Probably have told them a lot more than I needed to over the years. And I have been caught in a couple of big lies when I was younger. So I learned that lesson real quick. But to know that I could trust him, to know that I could call them at 3 a.m. or I could, and no matter what, like that I could always call them. That was a huge support for me. When I, and it still is to this day.
That's beautiful. And again, like you said, like that, you came from that really strong background of, based on love and connection, and it still happened to you. So I think, as a society, we really need to start opening our eyes to not seeing this problem as so far away from us, as we were talking about it before, right?
Yeah, we have this thing in America is called NIMBY. It's not in my backyard. backyard. And it's happening in the backyard of every house in
Yeah.
America. And, any yard is too close. So it might not be your backyard or might not be your kid, but it could be. So I think that, I think we need a
Yeah.
couple of things. We need to take care of all kids, no matter what, no matter whose kids they are. You need to look out for
Yeah.
kids. We need to, just make sure that, like, that your community is safe. Talk to your neighbors, find out who they are. So when something does come up or something does happen, you've also got that support as well. I think that's something that we're losing a lot too. It's just
Yeah.
community,
Yeah.
Community is so important in so many things.
Yeah, you're right. So how can people reach out to you if they want you to come and educate their companies or their team or different audiences?
Sure. I'm very accessible. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. And I think that's it right now. I do
Yeah,
other
I'll
social
add
media.
I'll add your details
Oh,
below.
yeah. So yeah, LinkedIn, Facebook, email me, all of that. Like you'll get an email back within 24 hours.
Awesome.
And and especially to survivors, if any survivors want to reach out to me, I
Yeah.
do know of a lot of like resources, more not resources in like money and stuff like that, but resources in like
Yeah.
communities you could join and like the social
Yes.
call that I was talking about and ways that you can get involved and just sort of get, within the network if you are interested in something like that. And also survivors, you don't have to be visible. You don't have to go on podcasts. You don't have to
No.
do any of this stuff. You don't even have to use your name if you want to be involved in this work. There's so many things that you could do behind the scenes, places you could volunteer for. And
Yeah.
we're getting ready to come up on the holiday season, and I just want to encourage everybody. I'm going to do my plug here for We Fight Monsters.
Yes. Yes.
We are actually housing a child sex trafficking survivor and her baby, who was actually injured, and we put her in a house and got her away from the abuser, and she's doing really, really well. But we've got space for a few other survivors that we're working on, but it's for trafficking survivors. But we desperately need help. We receive no funding. We raise all the money our own. We are working on grants and stuff like that, but those are things that can take 8 to 10 months to even show up. We do a lot of fundraising. We sell some really cool T-shirts,
Yes.
and we can give them those links as well. It's just
Yeah.
wefightmonsters.org.
I'll
And
add.
we're a 501c3, so everything is 100% tax deductible, and every single dollar goes directly into helping veterans and trafficking victims.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for highlighting that. And one last question. You talked about survivors reaching out. Like,
Mhm.
if there is a survivor listening to this, thinking, I want to get out of this.
Mhm.
Like, when did they know? Like, what are the things that, like, you kind of felt inside that you're like, I just need to get out of this.
If they're already thinking that, then they need to get out.
Yeah.
If you're in a situation where you can't leave, you can't. If there's any abuse involved, if you are having, or if you're having sex for money and someone else is taking that money and exploiting you, I'm not going to put down sex workers, because they are people that do sex work, and that is absolutely their right and their choice. But if you are being exploited, if you are in a situation where there's violence and harm, and you could potentially, all of those things. If there are
Mhm.
minors involved, absolutely, all those things. And I would encourage everyone to reach out in America to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. They
Mhm.
are an incredible group of people, and they are the best resource for if you're trying to get out.
Yeah. And is there one thing that you can say to them if they are listening to this?
You are loved, and you are needed, and you are worthy, and you are valued. And it's all hope is not lost. And there are people that are out here that are fighting for you, whether you know it or not. And we're gonna get you. We're gonna come find you. And there's hope. There's hope.
Awesome. Well, that's beautiful, Kristin. Thank you so much for being
Thank
here. I
you.
really, really appreciate your time sharing with us, your story and your learnings and everything. I would add all the links.
Okay.
And yeah, keep doing this incredible job that you're doing.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to highlight, this, and having Heidi on, who's awesome, and just having this conversation, because these are the kind of conversations that it's going to take for us to move the needle on this thing. It's
Yeah.
collaboration. It's all working together. It's survivors and law enforcement and the medical community and healthcare community and the corporations and the big businesses. It's going to take us all. And if we
Yeah.
all start working together and start listening to each other and start listening to survivors and get the proper funding, we could end human trafficking. I don't care what anybody says. We could end it.
Yeah. Definitely. Yes, I agree. Thank you so much, Kristin.